grew up in Buffalo, New York. Spent a good chunk of my life from up to the time I was about 27 in Buffalo.
No one had any information, or they had pieces of information. And he felt like, nobody's telling me what's going on. I know somebody's got to know something.
I had no idea whether we would be able to find anybody within the next year, the next 5 years, 10 years. And of course, since my father is now in his mid-80s, it's not like I have decades left to answer this question.
I never had a birth certificate, and that caused all sorts of problems.
He was trying to connect with people that he had grown up with, people that he thought might have information. So he was kind of on a personal mission. Mind you, this is back, I was born in '58, so there wasn't the technology we have today. So it was more about calling people, and I remember he was so frustrated because he kept feeling like he was hitting the wall.
I tried to apply for a work permit to sell magazines, and the people at the city hall said no, they don't have any record other than my school record. Around that same time, I had a big hassle, big fighting argument with my parents, and so I said, "You're not my mother." And she said, "No, I'm not. You were adopted." Oh.
My brother went on this quest because he loves to do research and sent my dad a DNA kit.
I never pursued it with them. Why was I adopted? Who adopted me? Where was I adopted? Nothing. And there was sort of a secrecy veil that hung over much of that household, all the households.
My brother was able to determine what hospital my dad was born at. So my dad contacted the hospital to see if he could get any possible records. And they said, well, that was back in 1930, so we don't even know if we still have them.
It wasn't until about 1911 or so that they started saying, this open records thing is a bit of a problem. We're going to really have to restrict access to these because there's this stigma of illegitimacy that we have to protect people from.
You weren't supposed to know. That was the operative.
His dad, his adopted father, was heavily involved in the prohibition and bootlegging, and had his own liquor company sort of thing, and was very well known in the community. So my dad, what he said is that he thought that his adopted dad was trying to keep it a secret, that he didn't want anyone to know.
In those days, this really was a scandal. And so laws began to get tougher about who would be given access to this information.
I've always had this sense that I don't fit in. I don't know why. And so that was pretty devastating.
One day my dad got this letter in the mail that they had found his birth records, which is shocking after all those years. And not only that, but there was a whole lot of information about the mother, specific that she had given up the child for adoption because if she didn't, her husband would divorce her.
My wife, for I guess my 75th birthday, got me a genetic testing kit. And because she's been living with, who are you, as well as I did. So I had that sent in my saliva and got back. And then over the years, I'd say, 75, at least 10 years or more, I would get you match with, and all the people I matched with were from Eastern Europe, predominantly Eastern Europe, and they were all Jewish names.
And my brother said, well, there's probably additional research needed, so I'm going to contract with some other DNA companies. And he ended up, I think, with 5 or 6 DNA kits and piecing together bits of information from each of them. Each of them has a different database. So that's kind of how the whole thing broke loose. And this was just within the last year, probably 2 years.
I don't know. It's frustrating because you are completely at the mercy of fate. It's like someone somewhere that you otherwise never would have met in life has to take a test. And number one. Number two, has to actually be willing to respond to your invitation to share information. And, maybe the first part we can handle, but the second part turns out to be a lot more difficult than I wish it were.
So I get a match about a first cousin. I write this person my so-called first cousin.
I tried to get her to respond and all of this. This was in February, and I didn't hear anything for months and months and months. And apparently, this is unfortunately the way things usually work on services like 23andMe. I've read in a variety of articles that the response rate is on the order of 10%. So, even if you come on to somebody with an incredible pitch like, oh, I've been trying to solve the mystery of who my father's parents are for decades, and you are the best and only lead I've gotten in all that time. Won't you please respond and give me the names of your grandparents? And then, just dead silence.
And bingo, yes, she had the family name.
Something or other prompted her to finally reply in December.
And I must say that this has occupied me about all the time.
So since it was a brother that took this test, we nailed it down, with absolute certainty. So it's definitely Natalia Gratz, I think her name was, who in 1930 apparently was involved in some extramarital activity and managed to produce my father.
Natalie, my biological mother, was very outgoing, very funny, and very energetic. They say you're just like the rest of the family. The same gestures. So the voice and the expressions and the comedy.
Things that we often think are formed by environment, like personality, expressiveness, mannerisms, et cetera, et cetera. And to see that, no, those things are actually very similar throughout a genetic family. You're right. It does make you feel more of a sense of identity with them.
He is like a kid in a candy store. He is so excited because he feels like it's the lost ark. He feels like he's found his purpose and he's found his mission and he's found his people, and now he can be at peace.
People were poor, people were unhappy. I mean, it's a hell of a time to live in the 30s. Then the Depression. So you're coming from Hungary, and then you come here, and you got the Depression on top of you. So it was quite likely, and this complicates the story in a way that I hope it doesn't turn out to be true.
Her husband apparently didn't think this child was his, and in the fullness of time, we learned that his intuition was right on the mark.
So the unknown part, of course, is who's my daddy?
I don't think she mentioned any of this to her children. I think there was some vague story going around about a dead baby or something like that. I don't know if they were referring to my father.
And he believes that his biological dad is probably the father of the family that was the home that they were renting or living in or staying in, and that's his biological dad.
It's real touchy. I do know the name of, let's see, how much of this can I really disclose? Okay, so as it turns out, my grandmother and her husband were then renting a house from an Italian family that consisted of obviously a husband and wife and 3 sons, ranging in ages from, I don't know, maybe 21 to 30. The father was 52 at the time, and if you buy the convenience argument, then maybe it's possible that one of them was involved with my grandmother. But it's a very weak case. She could have met this guy anywhere, anytime. It happened sometime, around August of 1929. So maybe it was one of these people, or maybe it had nothing at all, or maybe it was like a friend of these people.
It was not uncommon for homeowners to rent rooms to their ethnic neighbors. So you get other people from Italian may have come through that house at one point or another.
Approaching these people now and saying, I kind of suspect that maybe, your erstwhile respectable grandfather messed around with my grandma, and, here I am. So it took me a while, but I finally caught up with you. And would you take this test so that we can basically smear your grandfather? Imagine trying to have that conversation.
I would say this solves the puzzle that I've always struggled with. I'm sure people differ. Not everybody may have felt this intensely as I did, that I want to know where I'm from biologically.
It's just really amazing that my dad is so full of life and so excited to be able to find out the answer to this puzzle that's been troubling him for 84 years.